This is the BBC.
Simon Mayo, 88 to 91 FM, BBC Radio 2.
Hello and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast from your friends at Radio 2, where we have jingles like this. It's like the start of the show, really.
BBC Radio 2.
And this is me.
Mayo, Simon Mayo.
Anyway, but you know all that. Anyway, so here come the confessions of the week. This week we have Back to Life, Back to Reality. That's confession number 1. Then there's Baby Let's Play House. Then there's Roll Over Lay Down, which is a confession and not the status quo classic. The live edition, probably the best one. And our last one is called Cars and Girls. Here they all come. To the omnipresent triumvirate of justice.
Oh,
Remember that?
yes,
That's a new
I
one.
like this.
Very, very fantasy. I
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
You ought to have a special uniform. But actually, you should. You should have a special hat that you wear for this part of the show. Let's get that done. Let's get the production team
Yeah.
on that.
Both of them, yeah.
That's right, yeah. So its team sounds a little bit better. We want confessions hats, please. So anyway, Laurie says, I write today to beg forgiveness for a callous but miraculous act involving a goldfish named Patch and some ill-thought-out amateur necromancy. Now, I have to say, most confessions which would start with a goldfish very rarely get anywhere because they have a similar story.
Okay.
Anyway, it started at Christmas when my lovely wife decided against my better judgment to buy some fish for our youngest daughter. The fish were a compromise, as the idea of a family pet any bigger gave me flashbacks of my father pulling an all-nighter and tenderly nursing the family guinea pig on its final journey into the big hatch in the sky, whilst we all lost interest. Anyway, our family is 3 girls under 9, a small house, and 2 parents working full-time. It's a hectic shift without a pet unleashing everywhere. Thank you very much. So, we bought 4 fish, 3 named by our girls, and 1 jointly named by Mum and Dad. My wife called it Patch and said it represented our love for each other. I don't know
That's
why.
not great, is it? Patch?
Just sort of patched it up. We get
Yeah.
along. Anyway.
Oh, dear.
Reinforced.
Maybe she was
that's a
trying to
good
tell
one.
you something. I don't know. Anyway. Simon, I have to tell you, the symbolism didn't last, as the shriek early the next morning told me all I needed to know. Patch was down, gone, sunk at the bottom of the tank, lifeless. My wife and the girls were visibly upset, even more so when I quickly dispatched it down the downstairs loo, which is, of course, the time-honoured fashion. I had to go to work and leave the mourners and the wake planning in the hands of my grieving girls. However, whilst I was stuck on the M62, thanks for all the advice, Bobby, I hatched a cunning plan. A plan to save the feelings of my girls, and a plan that involved a trip to the garden centre on my way home. Having parked up and made my way through the pot plants and trellising, I quickly found a Patch-esque replacement in the pet section and scurried home. The grief had subsided a little, but my wife still had that look in her eye as if the death of Patch also symbolised the end of our marriage
Right.
and that nothing would ever, ever be the same again.
Oh, dear.
It's just a fish.
Not looking good.
So I executed my plan, which I named the Resurrection of Patch. I flushed the downstairs loo to move any lingering night watchmen, and when... I hadn't had them called.
Well done.
And when the water finally settled, I quickly popped Patch number 2 into the loo. I found the most impressionable member of my family, my 2-year-old daughter, and told her there was a noise coming from the toilet.
Of course.
I then quickly legged it upstairs. The commotion that ensued was something I hadn't quite prepared for. My wife was torn between declaring our love could never die and terrible guilt that she'd tried to flush it away in the first place. The kids were wide-eyed and hysterical. Patch was back, hallelujah, and according to my wife, who is far from an amateur plumber, must have been swimming around against the cistern all day. You got to fight against the cistern.
Oh, very good.
Patch was quickly restored to the fish tank alongside the other fish. The wake was cancelled, the girls were smiling, and everyone at their school thinks they live in a house of miracles. However, Father Simon, now I need to come clean. Cleaner than Patch number 2 after his toilety sabbatical. The weight and guilt of what I've done, plus my wife's discovery of a receipt from the garden centre, means that it's time to look for the absolution of my sins. I beg forgiveness from the original Patch, Patch number 2, and my 3 daughters and wife, who now superstitiously check thoroughly for fish in the bowl before they go to the loo. Well, you would, wouldn't you? You just want to make doubly certain.
Yeah.
Anyway, Laurie, thank you very much indeed. Now, you see, replacing fish that have passed away is, and you can find one very similar, this comes up quite a lot, but I quite like the ingenious method of placing the goldfish into the toilet, knowing that it's about to get hoiked out by very, very excited girls. And the miracle has happened. Sister Bobby.
It is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful comeback story. Well done, Laurie. However, just a word of warning. You see, the problem here is if you clean your toilet with certain chemicals, it might not be the best place to put the fish. I'm just saying, for anyone
Always
thinking...
the voice of responsibility.
Just saying, this might not be the best place to fish. Also, we don't know why Patch left them. So maybe a little bit of research before you just replace it with another fish.
Always a very good point. But also, he had just flushed the loo, so presumably everything was...
We can hope so, yes. I'm just saying, erring on the side of caution that the...
Night watchman.
Anyway, that's a new word. Laurie, you're very much forgiven. I think that's a beautiful story.
Okay. Brother Matthew.
Surely the genius of this story is him saying to one of his daughters, I think there's some kind of noise coming from the toilet.
A fishy disturbance.
Maybe you should check it out. I know if anyone told me there was a noise coming from my toilet, I would not be lifting up the bowl. I am going to forgive, just because this is a great twist on the standard my pet fish has died and I've replaced it and no one knows kind of story. But obviously when the fish is dead, it's dead and it's not coming back. But that's a little lesson for us, perhaps later in the day. So I am going to forgive just because of the noise coming from the toilet bowl.
Father Simon. Many years ago, in a town which may or may not be very much like Sutton Coldfield, the following events took place. Their impact is still felt today.
Wow.
This is an ongoing... The consequences of this story
Here we go,
are
everyone.
still ringing around at the moment. In fact, you may well be involved in this story and you don't even know it. Our family home, Simon, sat in a long row of similar houses along a main road. Behind that row of houses was a large field, about 25 acres in total. Myself and the boys I grew up with all loved playing in the fields, the meadows, the small woods, the little hills, the spinners and dips. It was our world, our battleground, our racetrack, our everything. Our only enemy was Dixon. Dixon owned the field, and he was gruff to us youngsters, very frightening. We kept out of his way, but when he wasn't around, his field was our wonderland. One winter evening, many parents gathered at our house. Out came the sherry and the vol au vents, and I was banished to my room, and I wondered why. Later it was explained that they were forming an action group to fight the development of a large estate of houses on our lovely playground. Arch enemy Dixon was selling out. We hoped against hope, but the developer won. Dixon moved to the coast to spend more time with his cash. In came the bulldozers, the dumpers, the lorries and the huts. In those days, access to building sites was easy, and we enjoyed playing in the huge drains that were obviously
different times, everyone.
And obviously, you
know,
did that in those days, but you don't do it now.
Don't do it now.
And on the giant spoil hill, well, you don't want to do that either. But soon they started building the actual houses. To start with, the house building proper was some way off. But over time, it came closer and closer to the end of the field we played in. To say the least, we resented it. Over the long summer holiday, we saw how the process worked. Men would set out the position of the houses. There were over 100 being built, using something called a laser, which was a new idea and one that they were very proud of. The laser could not lie. They didn't mind us watching as they put in vertical metal rods to indicate where the corners of the houses were. After that, the builders would dig the foundations using the rods as markers. Then the concrete foundations were poured, and after that, the walls went up. We saw that they attached lines between the poles to start the walls and make sure that they were built straight and to the correct points. Like the surveyors, with their laser thing, we thought this was a clever way to do it. Why are you smiling?
I think we're all ahead now, aren't we?
And then a thought occurred to us. If we can't stop the houses, we can at least have some fun.
Yeah.
It was actually David who came up with the idea, and as he's quite famous now, I won't give you the rest of his name, but if he's listening, he's grinning. Our plan, which is intriguing, our plan was simple, Father Simon. Instead of pulling the rods out, we decided to move them just a little bit and see what happened. Little did we realise what the effect would be. Each day we waited until twilight and then invaded the site. At first we carefully moved them a couple of inches. A lookout stayed watching, and the security man, that's what he was doing. He decided to come prowling around. The lookout had a Raleigh chopper bike with 3 gears, so we thought he would be fastest if he needed to get to us with a warning. little bit of period colour. Then in the mornings, from the top of our spoil heap and wearing camouflage twigs like in Dad's army, we watched using our parents' binoculars. Nobody on the site seemed to notice that the setting out rods were being moved. The builders dug the foundations, poured in concrete, attached the lines and built the walls as if nothing had happened. If we'd heard of high fives back then, we'd have high-fived. Instead, we just said, Boston. Our plan evolved, because Sutton Coldfield.
Yes,
that was my
it is.
Sutton Coldfield accent, just for a
Was it?
moment.
Wow.
Boston.
Boston. Well
Our
done.
plan evolved. We would move the rods progressively further, but only 2 of them at a time. David showed us why on a plan he'd drawn up showing the effect. Very clever. The idea was to see how far out of kilter we could get the walls before anyone noticed. This is very shocking. Each night we would move the rods a little bit further. Each day we would set up our camp on the spoil heap, nearly 20 feet high, so a great vantage point, and watch. The rods stayed put, the foundations were built, and up went the walls. To our amazement, quite a few houses and walls built according to our plans rather than the architects were constructed in this way. All too soon the summer holidays were over, the nights drew in, our devilish project was forgotten, and we went back to school. The housing development carried on, and our wonderland was no more. We found other ways to entertain ourselves and thought no more about our adventures. That was until people actually moved into the houses. Some of our school friends moved into them, in fact. And then we heard the stories about how the carpet didn't fit, or needed an extra triangular bit sticking in because the rooms weren't actually square. How the kitchen cabinets had a gap at each end because the house wasn't quite true. How the modern up and over garage door had a bit of a gap at the end because it was too small for the opening. How the eaves of the roof were soon to be a bit wider at one end than the other. How wardrobes didn't fit. How some of the older boys started asking if our friends lived in one of them on-the-pop houses. As they were.
On the pop.
Yes, the house had been on the
On
pop.
the pop.
As the slightly diamond-shaped dwellings had become known. He's in an on-the-pop house, he is. There were suggestions of poor workmanship. We heard about terse conversations with the developer. Solicitors were mentioned. My friends and I were caught between thinking we were about to be in serious bother on the one hand and laughing like drains on the other. In retrospect, I think our parents figured it out, but sensibly they kept stum, just as a band of saboteurs had done then and since. We are now so far past the statute of limitations, we can't be pursued in law for our actions, and the houses themselves have passed into local folklore as the ones that were built by men with crossed eyes. Except they weren't. They were built with the help of some naughty 12 and 13-year-olds who many years later still chuckle at how they got one over the grown-ups who built executive-style oddly bent houses on their favourite fields. I respectfully beg forgiveness for our silliness and hope that the people who live in the houses, the on-the-pop homes, didn't suffer too much in the end. Well, they are probably still there, and they're probably still cursed because the garage doesn't work and the kitchen's a little bit odd and the garage is not in the right place altogether. What a story. Obviously, we don't condone any of that. What do you say, Sister Bobby?
Andrew, I feel your pain at losing your kind of childhood wilderness. I really, really do. And I actually say I commend your strategy. That's a great idea. It's a bad idea. It's
Well,
a
they're
wrong
sticking
idea.
it to the man.
But but also just to do it a little bit, I think I would have over-egged it and ruined it because I'd have moved them feet apart. It was actually much clever with your subtle plot. So well done. The thing is, had you left Dixon alone and been a bit more careful, you might have not lost your playing field. It's only the fact that Dixon couldn't stand it anymore, the guy that originally owned the field, with all your shenanigans through the summer holidays, that he felt, you know what, these kids are ruining my life. I might as well just sell up to the new build.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Dixon
So
was
there
after
you
the
go.
cash.
Thank you.
So, but I'm just so you're not forgiven.
Not forgiven, Brother Matthew.
Well, I'm going to say this is definitely forgiven, and the reason why is I love these houses being on the pop, and I think they will have been a selling point for these houses. I think estate agents will go around and say, look, see how the toilet appears to be a bit too big and the cupboards don't quite fit and the garage doesn't quite work. Isn't that interesting? It's not like all the other houses where they all look the same, where it all looks like Lego.
No, boring.
No, exactly. Let's go for this kind of house where nothing looks quite like it should do. And for that reason, I'm going to forgive.
Dear Father Simon and the Juggernauts of Justice.
Oh,
how about that?
I am getting a T-shirt with that on right
Do you know,
now.
the Supreme Court, much in the news at the moment, maybe they could change their profile a little by calling themselves the Juggernauts of Justice.
They would definitely change their profile
It
with that name.
And then some people who have a pop at them might go, well, if they're a Juggernaut of Justice, I better think again.
Yes.
Anyway, just a
that's,
thought. Topical.
thought.
So, Father Simon, Juggernaut suggests that's you too. I write with a tale of high adventure, a tale of daring do that sadly became a cautionary tale of daring don't. My story is set in the early noughties, when I was a happy-go-lucky lad of 20, a year of university behind me and a promising future ahead. My tale begins on a dark, overcast night in the late summer. It was 1 a.m., and having imbibed a few libations following the completion of an evening shift at the Hogsmeade pub in Guildford, I was walking the 3 miles across the floodplain back to my parents' house. Can I say, a whole number of confessions start in exactly this way. I've been at the pub and I decided to walk home, and that's when the problems arise.
Okay, and most of them don't get through.
That's right.
Yeah,
but anyway, and this
good
one
reason.
does, and he's walking back 3 miles across the floodplain back to his parents' house. At 1 a.m, not much happens in the hinterlands of Surrey, and all was quiet, save for a strange throbbing hum some way away. As I passed through a fringe of trees that separated the path from a series of playing fields beyond, I saw the source of this portentous noise. Far to my right, a black helicopter was making slow sweeps of the river and woodland beyond, with a searchlight drawing closer to my location with each sweep. In the dark, slightly misty night, the searchlight looked somewhat cinematic to the impressionable young man strolling past. In fact, it felt like the kind of mise-en-scène you might expect to see in a spy film.
Mise-en-scène, everyone.
How about that?
Hello.
I think I mentioned that I had supped to some small degree of Dionysus' bounty.
Right, okay.
He'd been on the raz.
Yeah.
Suddenly, I had an epiphany. In my head, I heard this. Yeah. I started darting from tree to tree, hand resting on my imaginary gun, which was snug against my chest in a concealed holster. I was James Bond. I may have attempted a commando role or two. My memory is hazy on that point, but I think I
Definitely did.
Probably did. This activity kept me happily and energetically absorbed as I left the cover of the trees to cross the exposed playing fields. I started at a sprint, the dawning realization I may be one of the greatest MI5 operatives of my generation. This was all but confirmed when I was joined by a pool of bright white light, as if I was a tiny vaudeville tap dancer on a huge grassy stage. This guy is a screenwriter. A glance up confirmed that the helicopter was now directly above me. Must be just passing over, I thought, jogging on. The pool of white light moved with me. The thump of the helicopter continued overhead. Odd, I thought. Unusual, I mused. Befitting, I concluded. One of the greatest spies in Surrey. It felt even more like a James Bond movie than before, and in keeping with the character and situation, I took a firm grip on my imaginary Walther PPK and sped up across the field.
Okay.
Heading for shelter of the woodland that fringed the river some half a mile away. The beam of the spotlight stayed with me, keeping me in the centre and creating the strange illusion that I was running flat out, but staying still on a big circular white plate, like a David Lynch nightmare sequence. I was about halfway across the field, dodging imaginary bullets and hand grenades, when I was brought to a sobering halt by a loudspeaker from above. Stay where you are and keep your hands where we can see them. Stay where you are. I don't know what voice that was. Anyway, it was authoritative voice.
It was, yeah.
My heart beat heavily against the imaginary gun strapped against my chest. In my defence, I thought even James Bond is captured at some point. I stood for what felt like an age in my huge circle of light in the middle of Shalford Meadows. Possibly Shulford Meadows. Everything outside my cone of light seemed insubstantial and dim. Overhead, the helicopter hovered unseen behind the dazzling light, the steady whomp of its blades the only sound I could hear. I watched as a figure approached. Was it Sean Bean's Alec Trevelyan from GoldenEye? No, it was a police officer. He had a radio in his hand. He was a burly young chap, a fine representative of Surrey's fine constabulary, and I could tell from his face he'd already drawn some conclusions about me from his long, slow approach. He shouted, "Have you got a weapon?" "No," I say. "Did you fire anything at the helicopter?" "No, I did not," I say. Why were you running away? He calls. I was being James Bond. I shout back. There is a pause after this revelation. The PC... Honest?
Yeah.
The PC patted me down and, having satisfied himself that I wasn't suddenly going to draw a pistol and take him hostage, proceeded to give me a lecture on wasting police time and impeding a police investigation. I was suitably apologetic, as befits a gentleman spy who has inadvertently inconvenienced a fellow public servant. But I need your forgiveness some 15 years later for an episode which I feel does not reflect my current social consciousness. I seek forgiveness mainly from the policeman who was called out in the middle of the night to administer a dressing down to a tipsy barman, and also seek forgiveness from the helicopter pilot who was pulled away from whatever urgent search he or she was undertaking to hunt a time-wasting nincompoop across the fields of Surrey. And finally, I seek forgiveness from Ian Fleming and Cubby Broccoli for effectively blaming the world's premier fictional spy for such an antisocial piece of tomfoolery. There you go. Oh, look. It's Matt. Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, he's famous for it, so we can forgive him. What do you say to that then, Sister Bobby?
I say, Matt, you great twerp.
Yes.
You idiot. It was less James Bond and more police camera action, you big Burke. I mean, that's what you think. Is there's a police helicopter, or there's a helicopter with a searchlight. You don't run and hide in the trees. And also, they've got heat-seeking devices, haven't they?
Imagine if the helicopter's behind you, the temptation to run and just hold on to your imaginary...
No, because it would be terrifying. And you think, hang on a second, I'm innocent. Whatever they're searching here has nothing to do with me. So I need to stand with my hands up so they basically know not to chase me. You're a big Burke. That's what happens when you have too much pop and you can't handle it. So, Matt, you're not forgiven.
Too much pop does seem to be, it is a recurring theme. Anyway, what do you say
nothing wrong
about
with
that Brother Matthew?
I am going to forgive, because this story very much falls within the category of which of us could honestly say we wouldn't have done the same. We would have all done the same thing. I would
even do the little commando rolls?
Yeah, I'd have been doing all of that. I'd have been hearing the Bond music. I'd have been there in my tuxedo. Oh yeah! As soon as I'm getting chased through the woods by Spectre and all that kind of stuff, yeah, definitely, we'd have all done it. Anyone who says they wouldn't have done it is lying, and I am definitely going to forgive.
Bobby, you're lying.
He's completely wrong.
Pants
You're an idiot too, Matt.
on fire.
BBC Radio 2.
Simon and the Absolving Assemblage. My sorry tale takes us back 25 years. It's 1991. John Major is the Prime Minister. Tim Berners-Lee is busy inventing the internet. And Bryan Adams, Everything I Do, was number one, like forever. Just like they spoke in 91. We lived in London at that time and were fairly newly married. My husband and I, plus our 2-year-old son, went on holiday. One that was forever to be known as the holiday with the hills and the rain. We'd packed up our Ford Granada Scorpia and set off for the Lake District. It was beautiful but sodden. Raining almost every day, as far as I recall. We hired bikes, fed ducks, walked a lot, and even did a boat trip onto one of the lakes, all in the pouring rain. I'd booked to stay at a guest house in Keswick, comfortable but modest, with a lovely owner who fed us very well. We had booked bed and breakfast and evening meals, so we wouldn't have to find a different restaurant every night, with a 2-year-old in tow. There will be, and different times, obviously, so none of those easy, spicy chicken restaurants with pizza places up in the lakes. So, this was a wise option that we've gone for. Whilst I now think that I'm a pretty good cook, at that time our regular diet was probably less than wholesome. Being young and not having a lot of money, we ate 90s staples such as spag bol and lasagna, basically any other instant pasta that was knocking around. So a few days of eating local meat and lots and lots and lots of local veg in the B&B, I began to notice a change in my habits. Just saying that. One particular day, events took a turn that could not have been predicted. We were out driving one afternoon around the lovely hills and dales of Cumbria in the rain. Having lived in London all our lives, where everything is quite close together, we perhaps didn't appreciate the distance between towns and villages on the AA Route Planner travel map. So we'd been driving for a while, and I felt an inevitable call of nature on the way, and oh yes, maybe we could find somewhere soon. I really needed the loo, and no, a quick trip behind the bush would not have helped. So I say to my husband, who's driving, please, can you find somewhere? It's urgent. We're in the middle of nowhere. And he says, I'll pull over and you can go in that field. Briefly, Why are you looking at me
I think
concerned?
are there any animals involved?
Briefly, I genuinely considered this as an option. Was there enough cover? What kind of leaves are best? No, I decided. I need to go now. Find me somewhere else, I demanded. We drove on with me getting more and more distressed and crossing everything in an attempt not to... I crossed that next bit out, so I left that one. The moorland and the odd lone sheep stared back at me through the car window. The road turned and suddenly... What a relief. There was a pub, swinging sign outside, the lights were on. Father Sam, the relief I felt at seeing that sight was almost as good as the relief I anticipated. Stop! I yelled, leapt out of the car before it had fully stopped. Obviously, you don't encourage that kind of thing. I dashed across the road, don't encourage that kind of thing. Down the footpath, into the pub, straight through the door. There's a man standing in the middle of the saloon bar. In fact, it looked like he just jumped up from his seat. Please, please, which way to the ladies? He didn't say anything at all. He just pointed to the right. I didn't wait to be given any verbal instructions. I legged it, locked the door, sat down. I think you can imagine my utter joy, relief, bliss and liberation. Oh, thank you. That was absolutely terrific. It was then that I looked around the room.
Oh, no.
This pub didn't smell like a pub.
No, it didn't.
Didn't feel like a pub. Toothbrushes, talcum powder, a bath. That's a little unusual. And it was then that the penny dropped. Well, actually, the penny had dropped, but, now the other penny dropped. I had just burst into a complete stranger's house and demanded to use their toilet. And to be honest, I'll cross that next bit out as well. I tidied myself, took a few deep breaths. Actually, it wasn't such a good idea. So I held my head up, unlocked the door, and went back to the bar, which was... a lounge. The man was still standing there, looking at me, now joined by his wife, I imagine. They had quite a nice sofa, as I recall. Sorry about that. I saw the sign outside. I thought you were a pub. The man says, no, we're not. Right, I'll be off then. And I scarper back to the car where my husband and son were waiting, looking rather bemused as I come running out, shouting, go, 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 leave now! So, Father Simon, clearly I need to be absolved of this terrible sin for storming into a stranger's house and leaving my mark. But, to be honest, what were they doing with a swinging sign outside the house in the first place? Says Anne. Mitigating circumstances. We had a kind of a misguided moment about going into the wrong house a few months ago, which is a fine thing. But you can imagine in your desperation, you're not going to maybe do all the checks. But this guy, he would have had the shock of his life. Anyway, maybe it's his fault. Who knows? Sister Bobby.
That's perfect serendipity. I love that. Can you imagine if the door wasn't open? Because obviously the door was open because you could go charging through. It's a lovely set of circumstances where everything went right, I think. I don't think really there's a lot to be forgiven. What I like is the idea of the family then telling the same story from their point of view for years and years and years about the strange mad woman that came crazily
Weird woman from
into...
London.
Yeah, she
Where
went
they demand
straight to the
these
house.
things.
What could he do? I'm sure we've all seen it. We've all been there. We've all seen it. It's perfectly fine. What a lovely, hilarious story. You're
Novice
forgiven.
Nigel.
Yeah, 25 years ago, everyone left the door open, didn't they? And
they?
swinging signs probably meant something else. But I can imagine my son on the way home saying, where are the crisps then, Mum? I had a very similar experience.
Yes, but funnily
Here you
enough,
go.
we don't want to know about
But
it.
it was in Cuba, and I was filming something, last piece of camera, and I just had to carry on, and in very bad Spanish, had to say to this very bemused Spanish family, I think they knew what I needed, and I needed it there, and I had to come back to England with a man nappy on. But anyway, so you are definitely, Anna, definitely forgiven on this occasion. Mine went on for weeks.
We have to leave that story there. I'm just going to fade him out.
I know, it wasn't good.
Sorry, I just faded Nigel out. Matthew.
That's great. Yeah, I love this. I love both those stories. They're great. Going into the wrong house is always my favourite kind of confession. So yes, definitely forgiven. We'd have all done it, wouldn't we? I mean, what are you going to do? The house is open. Go in.
Well, you can't just go into someone else's house.
Well, obviously you don't just
look.
go in. But she made a mistake, and we'd all have done the same, I think.
Well, they were this week's confessions. Send yours, please, in case that might have unlodged a murky secret. Confessions at bbc.co.uk. If you missed any of the shows, don't forget you can always listen back online. Monday, we had the return of the book club. Yard Jass's book, Homecoming, thoroughly recommended. Timothy Spall was in on Tuesday, talking about his new movie Denial and his fabulous performance playing the lion in his school production of Wizard of Oz. What a moment that was. Wednesday, Game of Thrones star Maisie Williams and son of Rambo's Bill Milner were in talking about their new Netflix film I, Boy. Thursday for a Foodie Thursday. Nigel gave us the What Cooked Cod. And if you made it to the end of last week's podcast, and I asked you to tweet Windsor, not Cartland, got interesting variants there. Umar, Cat, Steve, many others staggered on to the end. Thank you. And if you're still going now and you just feel like telling me, if you could tweet Plenty O'Toole, it would be nice. Because I'll know what you mean.